In this Gospel we have two levels of operation. The immediate, that of Jerusalem, the city that never knew what pertained to its peace, forgetting the meaning of its own name, Yerushalayim, vision of peace, and the end times themselves. With regard to the end times themselves, this is something which in our modern society we tend to push to the margins. We have become accustomed to having a long innings, often in the order of 90 years by now. It was not the case when New Grange behind us was built. 40 would have been the average, and therefore the presence of the beyond was not so far away. Indeed, I was talking one time to one of the young Africans we had with us in the monastery, and he was saying how in their village in Africa every week there would be the funeral of 2 or 3 men of about 40 years of age. But we cannot push it aside. Indeed, this very morning, as we were coming out of the dawn mass, there was a siren going, and I learnt later in the day that somebody on this road outside, between here and Kenstown, had ended up in the beyond. I also heard just this afternoon that somebody was stabbed to death in Navan over the weekend, and it would be a family that I would be slightly involved in at a distance, because they're all interrelated quite often. And these are unprepared deaths, deaths that have no fraction of a second to prepare for, and they are many. Multiply these events by the planet, and we have something in the order of daily crashes into the beyond at a fairly high frequency. Not as high as that of the average death, which is about 2 per second over the planet, but high enough. And also those who go into a situation where, when it comes to the eventual departure, they're not in control and not lucid, is another element of unprepared death, because if they haven't done the preparation before going into a coma or whatever it may be, it's something of the same order, because they, as it were, wake up suddenly wondering where they've got to, and there they are, and it's all over. And this is what the Church wants us to meditate on in this last week of the liturgical year. Indeed, at Vespers we took this evening the possibility that we have to sing the third part of the Dies Irae. That's the old medieval chant that talks about death and is often used in the old rite for funerals. It's very profound, and it's something which smacks of the bubonic plague, because it's something that reminds us of how people were crying out with death all around them. Dies Irae, they were afraid of the dark, a day of wrath, that's what it means. And this is perhaps closer to human truth than what we have in our clinicized Western society, when we can manage to push it out. Because in the back of our minds we have this thought, oh, the medics will handle it. They have means of curing all kinds of things now, and so we put it on a back burner. Even if we're ill, we don't really die, we think. The truth is that we're all dying. It's just a question of when and how. And if we live in that truth, we're perhaps at less of a risk. It's rather as in daily life we have to pay our insurance policy, or our health insurance like BHI, if we want to be safe from not having big bills all of a sudden. It's rather the same. Our VHI is the weekly, if possible, use of confession. If we do that properly, then at least we're sort of paid up. Although we can't presume even there. God alone knows who is actually in a state of grace, who is not saying everything, who is actually hardened and not even aware of things, because sometimes we can kid ourselves and be going off into confession and not actually handling issues that ought to be handled. And there are quite a few confessions around which are more or less automatic, as it were a photocopy being replayed each time. It's kind of important that when we go to confession we do actually make a serious examination of conscience. We can see straight away whether that's happening or not. And the way of doing it, quite simply, is each night to prepare that confession by a good examination of conscience, with a pause, if possible, of a few minutes. We had at St. Antimo the discipline of about 3 minutes. It was actually incorporated in Compline itself, and it was kind of important. And we had, in the rite that we used, the pre-mortem rite, also the absolution with the confession and so on, involving all the saints. It was quite good as a preparation. And then we had the washing, as it were, with holy water before we went to bed. A good way of going into the grand silence of the night and anticipating the sleep of death. But all Christians should have something of that nature, so that when it comes to closing their eyes, they're actually ready to go in case they don't wake up. I conclude, no one, no matter how much he thinks he knows, can know what's beyond the veil. And those who make most noise are those who think they know most, but perhaps they're actually betraying themselves. Great scientists, great philosophers who protest that it cannot be. There was a classic case not that long ago in Cambridge, Professor A.J. Ayer, who founded the School of Logical Positivism, who said that in logic one cannot talk about the beyond and about God. It has no logical value. It's just too hypothetical and too distant, too theoretic. It's not of the correct order for logic. He calmed down quite a bit, however, when he died on the operating table and came back, having seen what was on the beyond, or he started to move towards a great tunnel and a light at the end of it, which was actually red. So he came back and calmed down about his certainty. And so it is, no matter how much we think, thinking has no power over fact. So when eventually the greatest thinker shuts his eyes in death, he also perhaps will have another thing coming which will last all eternity, and perhaps may regret he didn't have that quiet moment to prepare. In that context, our Holy Mother of the Church is wise in giving us these passages to think upon, for we all are heading for the same place. Oh, my forgivest, both great and small, in all I livest, the true life of all. We blossom and flourish as leaves on the trees, and wither and perish, but not changes thee. Great Father of glory, pure Father of light, thine angels adore thee,